Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Everything Medical Podcast. Tonight's guest speaker is Dr. Fava, who specializes in periodontics and implants practicing in Philadelphia. Dr. Fava, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure. Good to get to speak with some future colleagues, that's for sure. So I guess a little introduction is in order. So I originally went to college up in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a College of the Holy Cross, which is a liberal arts school, which kind of taught me how to think and how to learn. But then I went from there to Penn for dental school, and UPenn is in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia, which was, I think I was very well prepared going from a liberal arts style school to then like a sciencey kind of school. And then I went right from University of Pennsylvania. As soon as I graduated, I went into my residency, which is at UConn. And so UConn actually has their campus, their main campus, like up in Stores. If you think about like their football and basketball team, that's up in Stores. But down in Farmington, which is more like in the middle of Connecticut, not northern Connecticut, but the middle of the state, that's where their medical center is. And so I was at UConn for 3 years, and then from there I went straight into practice. That was back in Philadelphia. Even though I grew up on Long Island, Philadelphia was where I settled in terms of the practice that I wanted to go to and all that type of stuff. So that's where I currently am. That's where I reside, and that's where I'll be for the rest of my life, really. Once you make that commitment, you're kind of in. So that's where I'm at and where I'm from.
All right, Dr. Fava, we wanted to know for the first question, what sparked your interest in dentistry?
So originally I was actually applying to medical school, had my application out and the whole nine. And I was working 2 jobs. Before I was doing that, I had been working for a number of years as a lifeguard on Long Island. And so I was over at the ocean. It was a ton of fun. It was a very cool job to have for a summer. And I did it for many summers, and it was obviously a day job. And so then when I knew that I was going to be going into medical school, or thought I was going to be going to medical school, I had applied to get a overnight job as CRNA, which is like a certified registered nursing assistant. It's for someone who's going into like planning to go to medical school. It is a training that is it's like a testing and training. It should be very basic. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of responsibility per se in terms of critical thinking, but you have a responsibility to obviously be there for the hospital. And so I was doing these overnights, right? So I was working, and I was really getting what the feel would be like if you're in a scenario where you don't have any control over your schedule, and if you are, working for a hospital and potentially through like your residency, where everyone's heard those horror stories, really, of what it's like to have those nasty hours. So it was during that time where I noticed that on the floor that I was on was a step down from the ICU, and a lot of the surgeons were going through there. And I knew that I was interested in surgery because I was always good with my hands. I always was able to just work with them well, and I was able to manipulate my environment and the things that I'd be holding and stuff like that. So I knew that I was capable of doing it, and I knew that I liked it. So I knew surgery is kind of my general direction. I didn't want to be doing like thinking and medications. I wanted to be like thinking and then action, so to speak. Not that it's better or worse, just that was my inclination. But I noticed that the surgeons at the time, remember, I was just like, I was in college, so I was young. But I remember that the surgeons who were like residents, they're in like I didn't realize per se they're in their 30s. And I don't mean this from a vanity standpoint. I mean this from like basically like a health standpoint. They didn't look well. And it really like struck me. And it also struck me was that the stress that would happen I should say on the floor, on the unit, I didn't really care for how people treated one another in the hospital. And it was at that time when I think I kind of recognized that the direction that I wanted to go was not really going to jive with me. And I didn't think that I was going to have any sort of really superb type of skill set or talent that was going to put me above the fray. And I would kind of become like everybody else, where people become short with each other. It was clear that no one was really running the show. And what was really, I think, to its detriment that I didn't like was that it was very hierarchical. It was very much like, well, this doctor versus that nurse, or that, it was this thing. But really, I didn't feel like anyone, which I get it, it's a very, very huge thing to say you're responsible to. I didn't feel like anyone was responsible to it. I just didn't like it. I didn't like that type of life. I didn't like that type of work life. And so I retracted my medical school application. And my parents were very upset. And when I did this, it so happens that my father and I used to always go to the gym in the morning. And so we were always early. So we'd be at the gym at like 5:30, somewhere in that range. And then what would happen is I would come home and then go to school, and my dad would shower at the gym and then go to work. And when I'd be leaving, my orthodontist would be coming in. And my orthodontist kind of knew my dad because my family's in scrap metal. I grew up doing that until I started working as a lifeguard, because it's what made way better than working in a scrap metal yard or on a sanitation back of a garbage truck, which is what I was always doing. And so we would just chat, and my dad and him would chat because he liked to sculpt metal. And so he would go to my dad's yard and get metal and do that. And so we just kind of had these conversations just here and there. And he always asked how I was doing, what was going on. I told him that I pulled out. I don't really know what I'm leaning towards, and I have to figure something out. But I knew that I really liked to be in healthcare because I liked to work caring for people. I knew that I wanted to do that. And he said, you should come check out what I do. I love what I do. So I did that immediately. I shadowed him for 3 days, and I was like, oh yeah, no, this is what I want to do. And I didn't want to go into orthodontics per se, but I knew that the dentistry part made a click for me. And the major click was the fact that I had the ability to work for myself. I had the ability to be entrepreneurial, although at that time in my life, I had very little skill. I had very, very little skill for doing anything entrepreneurial. I really was not there yet, but I had the ability to do that. And I had the ability to work with my hands. And then I had the ability to work in an environment that I could actually shape. So an office would presumably be sizable that I'd be able to manage it, as opposed to say like a hospital or a hospital floor, that has all the nurses and doctors and admin that come through it on a day. There is no control over that. And not that I needed to control, I just wanted to work in an environment that would be something more that suited me and more that suited kind of like what my personality was, which was, it's very, very hard. And this is one of the things I teach my team, and my team, I think, is very good at recognizing this, but it's very different treating a patient or caring for a person. And I wanted to be able to do both. And I felt that would be a stronger suit for me and be more natural for me. And it would feel better. So thus, I promptly turned myself around, started into the application process. I would have, because of the way it all fell out, I would have 2 academic years that I would have to wait, because I'd be able to apply the next application. I would miss that year that I should have been into medical school, and I'd be applying then, so I'd be getting in for the year after that, which would be the next one. So I began that process, and I went back. I went to UPenn to do like a post-bac program, just because I was wanting to do something, and finding like research jobs, quite frankly, when you're coming out of college, especially because I came from a liberal arts background. finding like a research lab and that stuff like that, one, it didn't really suit me, but two, it was very, very hard. And also be able to find it and be able to survive was basically a no-go. So I ended up just taking a post-bac year, and I just did coursework. So I continued on with stuff that I'd already been doing and beyond, which actually did help because it made certain aspects of dental school much easier for me, because I took coursework that I would eventually end up taking in dental school. And then the next year after I did that, I had applied for, I was looking the whole time, and I found a great office, a very, very unique office that no longer exists, where they did clinical research in a private office. And so they were funded by things like, say, like Colgate or something like that, to test things like an anti-inflammatory gel was probably like our biggest one that we worked on. And so we would do that. And I was basically a dental assistant at that point. And I got really great mentorship. And then I just went into dental school, and the rest is history. But so it really was starting from, I wanted to go into medicine because I knew that I wanted to do healthcare type work. But then I realized that I wanted a certain type of environment that I wasn't going to be able to create, especially if I was going to go into surgery. Because I was going to be in surgery, I was going to be stuck in a hospital with no question. And I didn't like how people treated one another in a hospital, plain and simple. Not talking badly about hospitals or people who work in hospitals, just saying that wasn't going to be a gig for me.
And following up on that question, more specifically, how did you decide you wanted to become a periodontist?
Mentorship. Once I was in dental school, again, I wanted to go into the surgical thing. The cool thing is, no matter where you go in dental school, you're working with your hands. The least hand type of skill set that you require would be for if you went into, say, oral medicine, or if you went into orthodontics, because the way that orthodontics is practiced, orthodontists don't place brackets. I mean, but that's about it. That's like about the majority of what it is. So it's not particularly demanding on your hands per se. And I knew that I wanted to work with my hands. So I looked at oral surgery, and oral surgery kind of fell into an area, went a little bit into that hospital thing that I was talking about earlier. Plus the fact that oral surgery, the way that it actually plays out in clinical daily life for a traditional oral surgeon, is they're traditionally doing extractions and then they're doing some implants. And the reality is that was kind of far away from dentistry. It came away from the restorative aspect of dentistry, which I really, really liked. I still liked that, so I wanted to be involved in it, didn't necessarily want to do it. But that's where perio came in. And so perio was a really great balance for me, where it was a surgical specialty. So I'd just be doing surgery all day long, which is what my life is like, but it's extremely tied into the restorative aspect. And so the focus of my practice, as it's been over the past 10 years, has been really comprehensive treatment planning and comprehensive cases, where we're reconstructing generally an arch, a whole mouth, or, doing single aesthetic things like that. So I really enjoyed that. And the way that I came to that was I just got good mentors. So at a place like Penn, you're going to have a really good mentorship in the programs like Perio, because for a long time, not that you guys necessarily know this, but Penn was one of the hubs for Perio in the earlier decades. And so there's a tradition there. And so I got involved with really good mentors, and the mentors are what were like, maybe think like, what, I really want to do this perio thing. And that's how it happened.
To follow up from that question, what do you find is the most rewarding aspect of working as a periodontist? What in your day-to-day life?
So, not just as a periodontist, one of the things that if you're running, which I am working very hard at making sure that I am in fact doing that. But if you're running a really high quality office, one of your biggest fulfillments can be the teamwork that you develop, because you need a very good team. So I have 2 offices, and I guess just short of 30 people between the 2 offices. working to create their parts to create a whole of an organization that's, you know, got 2 locations and 3 doctors and stuff like that. So there's a large part of that fulfillment comes from the relationships you have with your team, and you know, having their back, them having yours, being organized around something larger than yourselves, very, very fulfilling. But also, you know, the relationships that we make with our patients. I was just talking with my wife and our really close friend last night, and actually it came across his purview at some point. And he said, wow, like the second highest rate of suicide in careers is dentistry. And he was like, that seems nuts to me. And I was then speaking to him about the depth of the relationship, which is really mostly a good thing, but there are times where it can be very, very challenging. And we won't get into that. We don't really have time. Maybe we could do that on another podcast. But the point is that the relationship you make with the patients, you know, we have patients who come into our office and, you know, spend many's of tens of thousands of dollars, and yet they come in and they bring food. And what I'm trying to get at here is I definitely actually want to talk with the group about money, because this is an important aspect of any career, and it's an important aspect in dentistry because marketplaces are putting a lot of emphasis and pressure on that. And I definitely like to address that with you guys so you could be a little ahead of the curve. But the point is, I'm not trying to talk about the money with the patient. What I'm trying to say is, here's a person who my offices are fee for service. So whatever you get, you're paying for. And the fact that people want to bring food for you and your team, you know, they take time to make homemade food and bring it to you guys. It goes to show you what kind of a relationship you have. And, you know, that's not an uncommon thing. I mean, honestly, I can say that I've never actually counted, but I would say once a week, once every other week, people bring in food. And really, well, it's nice to have snacks, that's for sure. And when you run ragged like I do, you take everything you can get. But the point is, you know, these are real relationships with people that you can really make an impact in their quality of life. You know, what you're doing in my form of dentistry is you treat pathology, but you are typically not dealing with life and death. Rarely you have biopsies that really go in a way that you wish that they didn't. You have to share with them some really bad news, and you have to get them the care from oncology that you cannot provide. But, you know, we have really good relationships. And that's one of the cool things I like about Perio, that not talking down about other specialties, but this is the specialty where I think that you really develop a lot of that. I think that prosthodontics is another area where you develop a lot of that relationship. And then as a GP, as a generalist, I think you develop those relationships. But so the relationships with the team, and then the relationships with your patients, the people who you care for, I think are probably the most fulfilling aspect of what my day is like. But then as a career, so outside of that, as a career, the cool part is, you know, you can take it really, really far. So I would still consider myself to be like a young clinician. You know, I've only been practicing we're coming up on 10 years. So it hasn't really been that long, but it hasn't been short either. And, you know, I have networks of people who are legitimate friends, not just colleagues, but legitimate friends. And they are from all over the world. And when I say all over the world, I literally mean all over the world. People in Australia, in Germany, all throughout Europe, Brazil, South Africa. I mean, people who, some of them I've never met in person, but when we meet, I know that we're going to hug, you know. So it's this thing, and that's because I've taken it to a point where I like to lecture and I like to try and give back to the community. in that way, to our discipline, so to speak. And you develop these relationships with people who are like-minded. And before you know it, I mean, as a small aside, a really cool thing that I did is we had a world symposium for the ITI, which is a really, really wonderful organization you can develop, you can be in as a student. I highly suggest it. ITI is International Team for Implantology. So the World Symposium was in Basel, Switzerland, and I was there. And then I took a train to another ITI fellow's office in Torino, and I stayed there with him and his family for 3 days and was with his family in his practice with him. And then I flew home. That's not an uncommon story for a lot of people, making real inroads with people who you'd never otherwise meet, go to places you never otherwise go to. And so that is a part of the career that perio was an easy way for me to do because I'm passionate about it. So I'm willing to put a lot of time and effort into it. And I'm willing to go way above and beyond just what is my practice for it. But, these avenues that I've had access to, I would never have thought of when I was in, especially when I was in like dental school. I never thought of any of that type of stuff ever. And it's really been a very enriching and fulfilling part of my life that I have colleagues that are true blue friends, people who I know that our families will vacation together and we'll organize stuff probably around symposia and stuff like that, but we'll do something and then do something, and that is really cool because it's fun to make those acquaintances and I shouldn't say acquaintances because they're not acquaintances, they become real true friends, people who you talk to on a near daily basis actually. And so that's a very, very fulfilling part that you all have complete and total access to. It's really as much as you want to put into it as much as you get out of it. So it's very fulfilling that way.
And more specifically, what are some parameters that periodontists need to factor more heavily per procedure for each patient?
So when it comes to like periodontic procedures, effectively, I think of them a lot as like a plastic surgery style procedure. So there's a tremendous amount of attention paid to tissue, the quality of tissue, the maintenance of tissue, the manipulation of tissue. Typically on a daily basis, my go-to suture size is a 6-0 suture, whereas you might find that for most people, their go-to suture size is a 4-0. And so I rarely use 5-0. I always use 6-0, and I routinely use 7-0. So it just gives you an idea like this, the scope that you're looking at is much, much, much smaller. All dental specialties have to be looking in millimeters. So we're all looking in very small, but I think that practicing like I practice, doing large bone augmentations and soft tissue augmentations in preparation for or in repair of implants and stuff like that. I think that thinking in the way of plastics is much more the way that I think. It's a lot of delicate manipulation despite large cases with large flaps and grafts and all that stuff. Everything is like being done like as if it was like the finest tailoring you could imagine. That's how I always think of it. So that is probably the parameter I'd pay the most attention to, is the ability to identify quantity and qualities of tissue and manipulate them really adeptly for knowing what biology presents you and working with it. So thinking both mechanistically and biologically, I think is the key. And probably when it comes to ultimately the biggest distinction for periodontics outside of treating periodontal disease is soft tissue, just managing the soft tissues. So those are the things that I think are the key parameters around periodontics, differing from any other specialty per se.
What would you say is your favorite procedure to perform?
Probably my favorite procedure to perform is probably the hard tissue augmentation. Specifically, my favorite thing to do is to release to increase the passivation or release the tension of tissues to close them over large grafts. I just love doing that because I feel like every time that's like, there is a science to it for sure, but I feel every single time there's like a big time art to that, of being able to pass a blade so adeptly as to just cut through a small layer of tissue and feel the tension release and know what that is, and then be able to suture it in such a way that it's so passively closed, that it's watertight but jiggly at the same time. I love doing that. And then when you do a soft tissue graft, I always take what's called a free gingival graft, which is taking like a little square rectangle of tissue right off the roof of the mouth. And then outside of the mouth, I cut off the epithelium, the outer layer. I love doing that. I find that fun. So that's kind of like filleting something. You do that on like on a wet gauze or a wet sterile tongue blade, and you do that. And so I love doing those things. So if I could sit there and do that all day and go from room to room to room just doing those parts, that would be pretty awesome for me. But I do happen to love it all. But those are probably my favorite things to do. They seem to be the most satisfying.
What are some of your work highlights?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is really growing a practice. I think that there's a lot of fulfillment that comes from that, and I think it's a real bit that's one of the interesting things about it is it's easy to measure because you can measure how many procedures you did, how much revenue the business produced. So it's easy to measure in that way, but the fact that you can evolve your practice and continue to do that is a big time highlight for me. Another highlight was actually getting my second office. That was a major, it was a major undertaking. It's a huge risk and stress, but it's exciting when it works out, and it's working out now. So like now we know that we're up on our feet and it's fully taken off and running and going. And so I know that it's nice and solid now, which feels really good because that's also not easy to do. So happy that I have that going. And then the other major highlight really is probably making the friends that I've made through it, both the people who I work with here locally and the people who I work with abroad, that I trade cases with and discuss and all this type of stuff. I think those are like the big time highlights. But last but not least, I would say that, the fact that it develops you the opportunity also to develop a financial freedom for your family and stuff like that. So, it feels good to be able to work fair and earn my living in a way that it feels good at the end of the week to be like, I'm exhausted, and that's because I like left it all there on the table, and that was for the benefit of other people. And I still remember what it's like in dental school and dental school and residency, watching my bank account go down to zero. I'm sure some of you guys remember that or are experiencing it now, like at the end of every month, like waiting for the stipend or something like that. That's a very stressful scenario. And I guess I have to say, like, as much as money is not a motivating factor for me, it is an important part. If you don't run a good business, your career and your care will suffer. It will absolutely suffer. You need to have a pretty strong business. And so I do think that it's good for people to have the opportunity to earn their place, so to speak. And I don't mean their place like in society. I don't mean that. I just mean like, I really still this day, I still am happy. I haven't been to the movies in a really long time, but I remember being like, it was a cost, a significant expense for me to go to the movies. It was like, I couldn't buy the peanut butter filled pretzels. Like they were just too expensive. And, I know it sounds kind of silly to say this, but those are things that I really appreciate. I really still to this day appreciate, because I remember when I couldn't, or I remember when I had to do it with thought. And now I have the ability to not do that with thought, which may seem kind of silly or trite to say it, but what I really mean is the ability to have that luxury of that freedom is something that it feels good to work hard for it. It really feels good to work hard for it. If it were given to me, it would feel empty and I would feel guilty about it. If I had to work my tail off for it, then it feels right. And going into a career like this, if that's the direction you guys are choosing, really anywhere in dentistry, I know I'm in periodontics, but really anywhere in dentistry, that's really awesome. That's really, really awesome. And you know what, I'm going to go off script for a quick moment just because it does make a segue into the money thing, because something that I think is really important for people to pay attention to, because it's good, this Everything Medical podcast, because you guys are trying to cover like pretty wide swaths of land so that people can have general ideas. But one thing that's going to be pretty common is going throughout all of medicine, dental medicine, ophthalmic medicine, medicine, going through all of that is an enormous market pressure for everything to consolidate. And so vertical integration is something that happens within capitalism. It's something that happens in fractionated markets. It's just the way that you end up working out, almost no matter what it is. And medicine is not free of this. So I remember about 8 years ago, someone told me this, and it was kind of hard to hear. And their argument was, at the time, was to say, which pharmacy do you go to? Walgreens, Rite Aid, or CVS? And the idea is, now you guys are still, you might just be a bit too young for this. But for instance, where I grew up, I grew up in a town called Miller Place. There was the Miller Place pharmacy, and there's a Sound Beach pharmacy. There were the two pharmacies that were a mom and pop thing. Well, guess what? Now we have Rite Aid and CVS. And the point is that you guys have all probably noticed, or at least you can think about it now to say, hey, if you're going to get something that you'd be getting from a pharmacy, you're getting it from a CVS, a Rite Aid, a Walgreens, Duane Reade, something like that. Enormous chain, a multi-hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion style company, right? And so that's also happened in medicine. Hospitals are purchasing practices, so people become hospitalists, right? Anesthesiologists, ER docs are going into large groups where the group is basically then contracting with specific hospitals, and they're trying to have enough of their docs to say, this is how we'll feed these hospitals, this is how we'll work, right? So this consolidation is happening. In dentistry, we've been predominantly solo practitioners, which is extremely rare. That's an extremely rare thing, and that's changing dramatically. And for a lot of students who are coming out, if you're like me, you're going to come out with some debt. I have some friends who've, unfortunately, because their family wasn't able to help them, say through like undergrad, dental school, stuff like that. I know people who've come out with as much as $700,000 in debt. From their first day of work, they're $700,000 in debt. That's an extremely heavy load. That's an extremely heavy load. All right. And so what will happen is you're looking and you got to start paying bills, and you got to start paying bills now. And I want to give everybody just a moment of pause. Just remember this when you're there, whether it's medical school, dental school, or something like that. For the majority, you're going to, no matter what your family life was like, you're going to go through your medical your medical dental residency style training, and you're going to start to become an adult who's making a lot more decisions on your own, like financial decisions, although hopefully they're mostly right now, sound and solid and relatively small ones. You have a smaller budget, you have less things to work with, and you're just trying to really get by, so to speak. But you're going to start to run into people, colleagues or future colleagues of yours when you graduate, and you're going to start seeing people start to be egotistical around money. And I grew up with good head on my shoulders from really good parents who raised me better than to know that stuff. So I know that money does not make a person. The only thing money can provide is it's a tool, and the only tool it is good to provide you for is opportunity, and that's it. And so I knew that, but I have to tell you, it was very eye-opening, and it was very like, oh, and then these corporations come in, and these corporations are going to be able to offer you jobs that the solo dentist will not be able to offer you. And it is very, very attractive because you do not have to do anything per se, except for be a worker bee. And you can start paying your bills, and they're going to pay you money. It's the first time you ever had like a really significant job. The majority of us have not had another career and then gone back into dentistry. So it's something that you just need to keep your eye out for. And this is where I'll turn it back into more like where we're going, is that you want to look for mentorship. And the reality is, in those what's called a DSO, a dental service organization, you are not going to have that. And I'm not saying all of them, because I'm not saying they're all bad, because I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that one-on-one type of mentorship, it may start you out slower in your economic success, but in terms of your dental success, in terms of your ability to provide care success, in order for you to develop a sense of self-worth and be proud of what you are able to do, that is a much, much, much more powerful way to go. And it may not seem it at its first glance, because they may say like, look at this, we're going to give you all these patients and we're going to give you all this money. And it may seem like that, but they are exacting their own cost from you. And that cost is by and large your ability to get better. And this is a very controversial thing to say. I'm not uncomfortable with stating my opinion, but what I can tell you is someone taught me when I was in my pre-doc, when you're in dental school, you're going through your pre-clinical phase where you're working on a mannequin head and teeth and all this stuff. And what he said to me was, he said, Phil, you better get good before you get fast, because if you get fast, you may never get good. And it's allegorical. There are many, many, many layers to this, but in dentistry, one of the things that you'll see people start to do is you start to see people talk about speed and time with money. And remember, these teeth that you're treating are attached to a human being. And so you're treating a person. And I by no means am saying don't go out and make an excellent living. I am 100% for that, 100% for that. Do the most that you can, the best that you can all the time. But do it in a way that if your parents were looking over your shoulder, that they'd be proud. And that is something that you can do here, which I'm not saying you can't do it in a DSO. I'm just saying that it's harder to. You need to find the right one. You'd have to find kind of a little more needle in the haystack with that. And so I just want to say that because I think it's really important for students to hear that, because the truth is I couldn't make that distinction and no one told me it, and I figured it out now 10 years later, right? So like now that I can see it and I can understand it better, I think that as students, you guys should know that, because you're not yet ready to deal with some of that mental space, because you don't have the frame of reference of what it's like to own a practice, run a practice, have a significant debt service, have to service that debt service, have to have the responsibility to patients. You have to grow into that. And it's completely appropriate that you don't have it now, but it's hard to separate that from some of these things that kind of look like glitzy and glammy. And I just want to give you guys just a sense. I just felt it was important for me to share that with you guys, because it's an important thing. And I assume that it also exists in medicine, because at UConn, I was in with the dental and the medical students are all mixed. So I was with them and I saw the same thing going on there. And so I just want to put that out there for everyone, just so they can, have that moment of pause, and also have that moment of just feeling to be calm. Like when you see that, don't feel the stress of all the stuff, and you will be able to, in dentistry, you'll be able to work no matter what you're able to provide a living. You will be completely and totally comfortable. And really, I can say this honestly, kind of the sky's the limit, which I'm very, very surprised about, but it's actually quite true. But you do not need to rush, and you do not need to feel that type of pressure, because that stuff I think gets put on to the students. And unfortunately, it's based on marketplace stuff, and it's based on these large corporations that, let's be realistic, they're trying to get people in, they're trying to buy more stuff because their venture capital that comes in, their private equity that comes in to give them money. It depends on how many offices they have. So even if they're crappy offices, the bigger, the better. That's how it kind of is. And so that's might be a gross oversimplification, but I did want to say that. I definitely wanted to say that to you guys. This way, I got my little part off my chest so that you guys can kind of protect yourselves. And to that end, if anyone ever has questions about any of the stuff we're talking about, you can have access to me through, easiest way is through Instagram. Probably you can just DM me right through Instagram. We could put that up at the end. We could put my my handle up, and you can just get right in touch with me through there. But go ahead, keep on with the questions. I know I got on a soapbox here, but I wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you for sharing that aspect of dentistry, shifting to a different aspect. So how has technology changed periodontics and implant dentistry?
Huge. I mean, the reality is most people who do implants have cone beams, which are, cone beam is a cone beam computed tomography, as opposed to just CT scan that you're used to hearing about in a hospital setting, which is computed tomography. Basically a tome, you could think of it as a volume. And so they take a CT scan, slices you like as if you were a stack of paper, right? Goes all the way down, little slices, 0.9 millimeters, something like that. Whereas a cone beam makes a cone, and it swings the cone around a volume, and it creates a volume of itself. So every single one of my patients are digitized in terms of their hard tissues. And then we utilize fully digital protocols where we can scan them intraorally with an optical scanner, scan them extraorally with a cone beam scanner. So we have radiography, and then we have also what is technically the intraoral scenario. We can marry those two together. We then can wax things up digitally, remove teeth, add implants, do the whole nine, and we can make guides that help us to do that. And so we could have somebody prepared to have, they can come in with whatever teeth they have, leave with the implants and prefabricated teeth already made for those implants on the same day. So that's pretty impressive. The other thing is we have a piezo unit that now is very commonplace, but something like that is a really delicate way to cut hard tissues but spare vital soft tissues. And then I would say, last but not least, the internet is a great way to get patients, and that's technology. It may seem like old technology, but I can tell you right now, as someone who pays a lot for advertising, that's a real technology that you definitely leverage. So I don't think that in implant dentistry you could work in just the analog world anymore. You would be very behind, I think.
And what are some steps you took to land your current position?
Say that again.
What are some steps you took to land your current position?
Well, like I said earlier, mentorship is really important. I personally believe that if you're passionate about what you're doing, you are going to get good at it. If you're not passionate, it'll be a lot harder to get good. That's just the way I think that things work, no matter what field you're in, no matter what you're doing. But I think that mentorship is super important, because it really comes down to not what you know, but who you know. And that has been the way that it's worked for me for getting into dental school, getting into residency, getting into my office that I was an associate, then a partner, and then the full owner. And the networking is very important, and not networking just like schmoozing and as empty as that sounds, but networking, meaning like, you're passionate about something, you spend time doing it. You have real insight into it. You go to things because, for instance, I'm a very capable practitioner. I still do continuing education so far above and beyond what is required. It's not even funny. I myself personally teach more continuing education than I'm required to take. But I also take way more than I'm required to take. And I continue because when you're trying to better yourself, you know, going from saying getting a D in a class to a C in a class, not a whole lot. You don't need to like make 1,000 different changes. You just got to start studying, right? And then at least you can go from a D to a C. You want to go from a C to a B. All right, well, now you got to work a little bit harder. It's not just studying. You got to study. You got to pay attention to how often you're studying, what material you're studying, and how well you got to maybe start to pay attention to that. To go from a B to an A, now you got to start testing how well you actually retain your own material, the best ways for you to figure it out. There's a lot. To go from an A- to an A+ is a much taller task. And the same thing goes for being a wonderful clinician or a great business person or a good leader. To get to above 90%, you got to scratch for every little point, and it takes 1,000 little things. You know, it's not just like, hey, we'll start studying now. That's just like one big thing you got to do. But now it's 1,000 little things. And so I don't mean to be vague, but the point is your passion will help you to drive those things and help you to you will naturally find the people who have similar levels of interest, similar types of passion, and then they will find you naturally gravitate towards each other. And that is how you get to where you're going. It always really comes down to, it's still a human capital. So it's very, very important that you do that.
What would you say are the challenges that you face as a periodontist?
I think one of the biggest challenges is really just the cases. I mean, everything that comes my way really is a very challenging case. I don't really get a lot of straightforward cases anymore. I think with the changing of the dental landscape, with where implants get placed, meaning by which practitioners and when and stuff like that, that has changed stuff. The other thing is, a lot of implants have been placed by people who are not capable of doing it at the highest level. And what happens is 5 years or so later, when it unravels, trying to fix those cases is very, very tough. And it's not just tough clinically and technically, it's tough behaviorally, because you have a patient who paid a lot of money for something and they feel extremely let down by dentistry. And because they feel so let down, it's a harder treatment to get a person to understand why there's going to be multiple steps, especially when, let's say, the other practitioner who didn't get them where they needed to go did it like in one step or something. I do a lot of immediate implants. I do a lot of one-step style stuff, but that's because I'm actually an expert. You know, like that's because I actually have an expertise that allows me to make those judgment calls on how I select the cases. But I think that the biggest challenge is the dentistry that's coming our way. Is some of it is iatrogenic, which is a word that some of you may not know. It means that we caused it, the practitioners. So we have iatrogenic pathology that or failing cases that it's tough because it looks bad on the entirety of the profession. And then also those scenarios provide some pretty good technical challenges, because when implant stuff goes wrong, it goes like way wrong. Better to have teeth go wrong, much easier to recover from or to restore. Way harder to deal with implants.
If you could go back to dental school, what would be one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
You know, I think I've already said it, and I hate to sound like on repeat, but mentorship. I really think that mentorship is really important, because the truth is, knowing what I know, I'm not so far away from dental school that I've forgotten about it. But I'm also far enough away that I know, I own and operate 2 high-level, high-producing practices. And I know the stresses that come along with it and the experience that I've had to gain for it. And what I can tell you is I never knew that I was going to be doing what I'm doing. Never. So the mentorship, the people who you surround yourself with, is probably the most important thing. It really truly is. Where you go to school, I mean, Penn worked really well for me because it was more specialty based. I was more about specializing, and it was happened to be perio, right? And happened to be a good spot for me to get perio experience and stuff like that. So, but that was pure dumb luck. That I went to Penn because I thought that I'd be able to be successful there. I didn't really know, it wasn't so well planned out. They could say, hey, then I'd be a periodontist in Philadelphia. That was never on the radar when I was making that decision. So what I'm saying is good mentors are who help make sense of whatever way you're going. You'll never be able to script it the way that wherever you get where you're going. When you look back at it, you'll be able to see that the pathway, but looking at it going from where you are now to where you're getting, you'll never be able to see it. And what's the most important thing is to have good people alongside of you. That's why you need good mentors. Good mentors will help you make better decisions, will give you better opportunities to make other decisions. And I think that that's really the most important thing. Do not feel like you have to have everything figured out right now or when you're in dental school to be successful when you get out of dental school. That is not true at all. You need good mentors to do it. That will make it a lot easier.
Do you think that dentistry as a whole will become a saturated profession at a certain point?
So there are aspects of it that are. There's no question that it already happens to be that way. Implant dentistry is a great way to kind of make an analogy for all of dentistry. But I will say this, and this is an unfortunate but true concept. There will always be some room for a niche market. What a niche market is for the clientele for whom they decide that they want more than what is normally offered to them, and they're willing to pay for it. So my recommendation outside of, it kind of goes back to fight against, which you're talking about the saturation, to go back to the last question, is learn to become a complex problem solver. That is the most important skill that I have. Despite the fact that my hands need to do very many things very beautifully, the reality is if I couldn't think my way through it, and if I couldn't analyze my way through it, it'd be useless anyway. So the point is there some level of saturation? You better believe it. Will there be less owners and more employees in terms of dentists? You better believe it. The DSOs are absolutely gunning for that. There is no question. But the good news is complex dentistry creates a lot of value for the right amount of people. And so, I'm sure that a DSO's model would know how to look at a demographic and say, this circle of area has this type of median income, this type of median household value, has this amount of expendable dollars, and we're going to go in and this is going to be our little, and they can be very poignant and really think about that. But what is super, super, super hard to commoditize is your ability to answer a complex or to solve a complex problem for somebody. There will always be a market for that. Always, always, always. And the reality is, as the dentistry that continues to get done doesn't get done at the highest level, it creates these complex problems. And this will be something that will feed forward. The pendulum will swing back. So right now, DSOs are on the upswing, no question, but there will be a pushback. There will definitely be a pushback because there just will. These are things that happen cyclically. There was some sort of a cycle like this back in the early 80s, actually, where a lot of private equity money came into dentistry to try to jazz things up and stuff like that. But the point is, it will be saturated if you don't plan on trying to work really hard and make something of yourself and be able to do something for people over and above what is just, hey, we have implants here for $9.99. Like the truth is there are people who that's what they have to do. They have to go for the $9.99. But there are plenty of people who are looking for a good patient experience, looking for an excellent treatment outcome. Learning how to do those two things takes a very long time, takes a lot of commitment. And so I think that while it is somewhat saturated and everybody's out there placing implants, for instance, I still place a ton of implants. I mean, a ton. We are a large implant practice in our region. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it to say, and I'm in regions where lots of people are placing implants. Non-specialists are placing lots of implants. And yet still, the number of implants I place per year continue to grow, continue to grow. And I'd like to think, although there's no way to measure it, that it has to do with the fact that I keep on being able to take on more and more cases that are more and more challenging, that require more skill, and that's where it's at. So, I do think that saturation will be a thing to deal with, but I do think that your best defense to it is to really try and make yourself into a great practitioner, because it'll be easier for you to create a following when you can provide really good care.
And for our last question tonight, are there any specific community service organizations that you are involved with?
So the things that I am involved with actually are completely outside of dentistry, and it's really because my wife has a serious heart condition. So we kind of are involved with that, and so they're not things that like you guys really like know about or anything would do. I would say that you'll probably have opportunities in your dental curriculum to be able to do some like outreach stuff where you travel abroad, or you stay local and you do stuff like that. And I think that is a very, very good experience. I think it is very, very important to spend time with underserved and to spend time with those who really need help. I did that with my family growing up, and it gave me a sense of perspective. And I think it's really, really important that you actually do the same. I do think that those things do look nice on applications and stuff like that. But the reality is, it wouldn't matter what you were doing. If you're doing it with a lot of passion, you'll have something to say about it. So there's a lot of people who go and check boxes and do like, well, I got to do this volunteer and I got to do that. But it's a whole lot more powerful if you do something with a whole lot of passion that you really care about. What it is far less important than how much you care about it. And so, if you were super interested in something and really passionate about it and really felt that it needed your attention and you wanted to give it your best attention, when you were, say, interviewing, you would have a lot to say about it. And you'd have a lot of good things to show about how it shaped you, as opposed to someone who's like, I served underserved communities that needed dentistry. Oh, what'd you do? I assisted the doctor in doing this, and I did this, and I cleaned these, and I took on a lot of responsibility like that. Very different than if you're like, I did Meals on Wheels for my local community, and I would deliver the food, and I made this relationship with Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones told me about this story of XYZ, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do what I'm doing, or that's the thing that will always stick with me. That's like, I just made that off the top of my head, but the reason why I'm bringing it up is because those types of outreach things should be parts that are really from inside of you that you want to reach out to. So don't get caught up on making sure that you did the right one, or that like, it's not that. It's really do something you're passionate about, because you'll have something for it. There's something will have transpired that makes some kind of formative change, or some kind of truth that you could share, as opposed to just saying the generic thing like everyone else in the application cycle is going to show that they did some sort of outreach thing. It's more important you find something that you really feel passionate about. And I think that is what it is. So for me, like, I'm really passionate about perio, but I'm really a lot more, I spend a lot more time and charitable giving and charitable time with these heart condition things that happen to run out of CHOP in Pennsylvania, in Philly. So, that for me is a big deal, because it impacts my family, and so it's a big part, and I know how it impacts families. And so I want to help them just like they want to help us. And so it's just so that is something that I'm not going to bore anybody with it, but that's something that I could talk about at length, about sincere things. So if you're talking about your application cycle, that's a way better story than somebody who interviews you and they say, tell me about the time that you went to Costa Rica to do dental work. And you're going to be like, I cleaned the instruments, and I did something. I could speak Spanish, so I blah, blah, blah. Like, you're going to do something like that. And that, honestly, it's really not that interesting. It's not that appealing. It doesn't really show any true like passion or commitment. When people are looking to admit you, they want to see someone who's got the fire in them. Those people go somewhere. The people who see something and they want it and they go for it, they go somewhere, and you want them on your team. And so the dental schools think the same way. They want the people who are going to be successful, not financially successful, people who are going to make something of themselves. That's what they're looking for. And so those people have something to share. And that's why pick whatever you guys like, whatever is close to your heart, just do it. Whatever seems to make the most sense.
Well, those are all the questions we had for you tonight, Dr. Fava. Thank you so much for taking the time to discuss with us. And we hope this podcast provided insight into periodontics. And thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify. Thank you. And we hope to hear you. We hope to have you in our future podcasts.
All right.